Actually, if you look at the history of periodic table, what Mendeleev had proposed, Eka, Dvi, Tri, even though he was Russian, you see that he had used Sanskrit names for those yet to be discovered elements for which he had predicted the properties. So yes, in principle, the periodic table Sanskrit chemical names can indeed be Sanskritized. The area or the practical utility of chemistry by our forefathers has always been in a pragmatic field like health science, namely Ayurveda. So you all the way from 1000 BCE, on which we can lay our fingers very firmly upon, till say 1920s, you have this huge corpus of literature pertaining to both chemistry, material science as well as the health science. Santataha parikshyan nyatarat bhajante. So as students of science, it is imperative on us to in fact test it out and then convince ourselves and then propagate that particular knowledge. Whether it is proper knowledge or pseudo knowledge, our tradition has never shied away from calling a spade a spade. So my question is, will the Marxists go to such nuances and lay out all the details? Or will they propagate only their preconceived propaganda items? And which is what they have been doing. I mean, this analysis was happening in the 80s. So PCA was considered as a nationalist, and then so-called Marxist historian were putting out points which were supporting their cause and opposing whatever PCA had to say. By the way, PCA wrote the History of Hindu Chemistry Part 1 and 2, which got published in the first decade of the 20th century.
Can chemistry be Sanskritized?
That's an interesting question. Actually, if you look at the history of periodic table, what Mendeleev had proposed, when all the elements were not discovered during his time, he had made some intuitive chemical intuition based on chemical intuition. He had arranged the elements, and based on his chemical intuition, he had predicted the properties of those elements that were not discovered by his time. So what he did, he left those places blank, but he also christened the name of those elements like Eka, Dvi, Tri. Even though he was a Russian, you see that he had used Sanskrit names for those yet to be discovered elements for which he had predicted the properties. And this goes on to also say as a sidetrack that he was very much impressed by the Sanskrit linguistics, Panini Sutra, and he was very much impressed by the 5x5 matrix arrangement of the Varnamala. So people say that he had got the idea of arranging the elements also based on this 5x5 matrix. So yes, in principle, the periodic table Sanskrit chemical names can indeed be Sanskritized, but as a student of chemistry and a Sanskrit Anuragi, if I were to ask the question, what benefit are we going to derive out of it? That's a larger question for which perhaps I do not have a clear answer at this point of time. So to answer your question in short, yes, it can be Sanskritized, but what are we going to achieve by that? That's something that we need to discuss about.
Like Lilavati for mathematics, are there ancient Indian texts on chemistry?
You gave an example of Lilavati from mathematics, and the question is asked as what are the ancient texts like Lilavati? You may be already aware, but since I think you have framed the question because Lilavati is quite popular. Even in the domain of mathematics itself, there are texts which are at least 1000 years older than Lilavati. Lilavati was by Bhaskaracharya II, and it was from the 12th or the 13th century. And we have at least Aryabhatiya by Aryabhata, and in that also we get Aryabhata acknowledging his predecessors. So the ancient text saga goes way back in the antiquity. Coming to chemistry, now unlike the field of mathematics and astronomy, the field of chemistry is not just one pointed focus, because the area or the practical utility of chemistry by our forefathers has always been in a pragmatic field like health science, namely Ayurveda. So the Ayurvedic texts are not very oblivious or different from the chemistry text. Added to that, you have the European practice of alchemy, which comes from the Arabic word al-khimi, and they have a definite practice and they have a definite corpus of literature associated with that, where the part of alchemy literature is also about something similar to Ayurvedic literature, where attaining the perfection of the body through elixir, intake of elixir was the main aim. But the corpus of alchemy literature, European alchemy literature, is towards the transmutation of base metals into gold. Now, somehow or the other, whether we like it or not, the historian of science have juxtaposed this alchemical presupposition on our Indian chemistry texts as well. So much so that the whole rasa-śāstra text has been brought under the garb of Tantra and indeed under the garb of alchemy. So even if we accept that on the face value, the texts that talk about rasa-śāstra date back to antiquity, as the written text as back as 1000 BCE. Now you have a work called Rasa-Ratnakara. Many well-meaning scientists, even like Acharya Prafulla Ray, have attributed this to Nagarjuna, the Buddhist, but it turns out that this was by one Nityanatha Siddha, and the Rasendra Mangala was the other text which was kind of mistaken. So one text on which we can lay our fingers, which is very old, is this Rasa-Ratnakara. And as I said, the Tantra texts that deal with Rasa-śāstra are ubiquitous, and many of them have not been dated yet. Fast forwarding, very popular texts like how you quoted Leelavati from mathematics, we also have Arthashastra, and we have texts from Ayurvedic period like Charaka Samhita or Sushruta Samhita or Ashtanga Hridaya by Vagbhata. Of course, Ashtanga Hridaya comes later, but from the classical period you have Charaka Samhita, Sushruta Samhita, and the other Samhita related to the health science around that period or even before that have got copious literature from chemistry. Then again, fast forwarding to the second millennia, you have, although the dates are debatable, but still these books are related to second millennia, Rasarnava, Rasaratna Samuchaya, and then again coming fast forward, as late as the 20th century, you have Rasa Jala Nidhi by one Bhudev Mukherjee. So you all the way from 1000 BCE, on which we can lay our fingers very firmly upon, till say 1920s, you have this huge corpus of literature pertaining to both chemistry, material science as well as the health science.
What are the skill sets required to proceed with researching ancient Indian chemistry?
It's a very timely and a very brilliant question. What kind of skill set is it required to probe into this whole area of ancient Indian chemistry? Of course, a background knowledge of chemistry, at least a high school chemistry, is both necessary and sufficient for getting into this, for the Vishaya Pravesha, getting into the subject. And a working knowledge of Sanskrit will be of a very added help. Both are required, but not at a very scholarly level to at least begin with. See, before I proceed on this answer, one of the bad things that happened in our country, or one of the evil things that has happened in the country is in the last at least 75 to 100 years, is that whatever manuscript that our immediate forefathers could lay their hands on, if they happen to be, say, in a language other than English, they were relegated to that language department. So most of the corpus were in, say, Sanskrit, Devanagari Lipi, they were relegated to the Sanskrit department alone. Now, Sanskrit people can read those texts, but to to understand the scientific concept enshrined in those manuscripts, they are not well trained in that aspect. Just to give a very simple example, Feynman lectures of physics. is a very famous physics book that every JE aspirant will be going through. Now, that Feynman lectures in physics is written in English. Now, if we give that book to an English professor, needless to say that professor will be able to read and make some cursory understanding, but to get to the depth of the classical mechanic content that the lectures contain, one needs to have a physics background, or at least one needs to be guided by somebody who can understand the physics which is told in the language of English in that particular book. So is the case with our ancient Indian scientific literature, which are, if they are written in Sanskrit, yes, we need to know the language in which it is written, but at the same time, parallelly, we need to know also the subject matter. In this case, it happens to be chemistry, so it's all the more important that we need to know. Added to that, since these are technical subjects, many times, although not much in chemistry, but this is very true with respect to ancient Indian text about maths and astronomy. You may be aware by listening to other people, especially Professor Ramasubramaniam, MD Srinivas and MS Sriram, that we had a different kind of a number system in our ancient times, namely Bhuta Sankhya, Katapayadi Sankhya and Aryabhatiya Sankhya. Now, in Bhuta Sankhya, the word Rama would represent 3, Bana would represent 5, Veda would represent 4. So now somebody who is conversant with the technical content of the subject, if he or she comes across this word Rama or Bana or Veda, they will be able to decipher that this is not merely that Bhagavan Ram is being invoked here or the Chatur Veda is being invoked here, but it is the alpha numeral, it's a Bhuta Sankhya that is being talked about here. Now somebody without this background knowledge will not be able to make head or tail of this particular word representing a number. So the technical know-how of the field, not the entire scholarly content of it, but at least the basic of that, or an aptitude to learn about that is very much essential. Added to that, we need to have some working knowledge of Sanskrit. One caution here is that even people who may not know Sanskrit but may be very much passionate towards the subject, their immediate go is the secondary sources, which are translated sources and by and large in English. And whether we like it or not, they are by the scholars from the Western soil. I have nothing personally against them, but many times without knowing the cultural context in which these manuscripts were created, there could be a lot of aberrations in the translations. So when we today are going back to the original script via the English translation done by foreign scholars, notwithstanding their scholarship, it's not something to put them down or criticize them, but it is by design of their geographical placement, which surpasses their scholastic ability also. So that can come as a handicap in completely understanding the original script. So it's all the more important that we do not blindly believe the secondary sources. We go to the primary sources, and if we are not equipped with understanding the Sanskrit, it's always good to collaborate. We may have our friends who may be good at that language. We can always sit with them and approach the subject. It is like, in how in Sanskrit poetry they describe, it is like a narikela paka. It looks hard from outside, but once we break it, it's like just a very sweet coconut water from inside. So yes, the necessary and sufficient condition for a passionate student to research in this area is both a basic foundational knowledge about this technical subject as well as Sanskrit. Even if, as I repeat, even if I do not know the language Sanskrit, we can always collaborate with somebody who knows the language better, and by which we can have a combined forward in order to understand what has been enshrined in this literature.
Anything and everything of past Indian knowledge is labeled as either superstition or pseudoscience. How much of it is true?
A pointed question, and I would say a nice question, and everybody has to ponder on this. But let me take you back to the period of Kaṇidasa. When he was coming up, he had a very beautiful verse, because his works were not getting accepted. And by that time, established poets like Bana and all their works was what was being praised. And he had to say this, Puranam ityevana sadhu sarvam nachapi kavyam navamitya avadhyam santatah parikshyan yatarad bhajante moodha parapratyayane buddhi. And this was told almost 1500 years back. Santatah parikshyan yatarad bhajante. So this is a key word that I wish to give as a take-home message. That we need to test it and then come to a conclusion whether it is something a matter of knowledge or whether it is something pseudoscience which has to be completely thrown out. Without that, going by a preconceived notion, or if some powerful figure has told an opinion and we kind of latch ourselves to that, either positive or negative, are both deleterious to this whole effort of trying to understand what our forefathers had done. So santatah parikshyan yatarat bhajante should be the mula mantra for any aspect, contemporary or the past. It is indeed true that a section of intellectuals or pseudo-intellectuals, or who would like to be called as intellectuals, have created a narrative as whatever is written in or whatever is in Sanskrit corpus, as in they say in Hindi, it is all kapola kalpit. It's all humbug, bogus, it's regressive, it's not going to lead us for our progressive future, it has to be shunned, or something that we need to completely cut our roots away from those if we have to achieve if we have to march on the path of progress. See, when Rajaram Mohan Roy, in this very nearby this very geography where we are sitting and doing this, in 1850s, when he had envisioned the future of India, he had a particular angst in him. He had a vision, and then based on that, his personal vision and the conviction and his passion for his brethren, he had laid down a particular path. Now, but there have been aftermath of this, where as the colonials had come and said the burden of civilization was on their shoulders. Many intellectuals or pseudo-intellectuals have taken this they've stretched it far too much, and they've blindly dismissed, saying whatever is now in Sanskrit, or it's all humbug or pseudoscience. So again, Kalidasa's words should come to our mind, santatah parikshyan yatarat bhajante. Let us not go back to the past. Let us take contemporary, current literature itself. There are journals in which serious science research are getting communicated, and at the same time there are lots of mushrooming journals of very low quality where anything in the name of science is getting passed and it's getting published. And it has been so rampant that you may be aware, just last month our University Grant Commission had to take a very bold step, saying that for getting a PhD degree one need not have a publication, a scientific publication. Of course, it has incurred the wrath of many academicians, but the logic behind which this particular step was enrolled when it was told, taking example of this low quality mushroomed journals in which a scholar's time is getting wasted in just going behind publishing in such low quality journals or even pseudo journals. The current time we have those things. Now fast forward to say 500 years. 500 years later, if somebody does an archaeological excavation or does a academic archaeology, they will see that there are well-meaning journals and there are this literature also. They may not be able to lay their hands upon the arguments that have been going on now to ban this illegal journals or low-quality journals. When they lay their hands, they will get the information from this low-quality journals as well as the well-reputed journals. Now, it's not that everything that is coming out from 500 years back is all knowledge. There is pseudo-knowledge coming from this low-quality, shady journals. But at the same time, there is a well-reputed journal from which established knowledge is coming forth. How is it different now when we are looking at our own past? So it's again, Santatah Parikshyan Yatarat Bhajante. So anything that is written in Devanagari is not hunky-dory. There was a very satirical grammarian, or perhaps he was a poet, I don't know its name, it's a Subhashita, it is being told, that somebody just, he composed this as like a satire. It goes like this. Uttishthotishta Rajendra Mukham Prakshalayasvataha Prabhate Rudanti Kukku Chavaituhi. So this is a satirical composition where the first line ends Prabhate Rudanti Kukku. Actually the word is Kukkutaha. But this poet is not able to compose in the proper chandas. So the taha comes in the previous line. Uttishthotishta Rajendra Mukham Prakshalayas Vataha. Mukham Prakshalayasva. Wash your face. That there lies a sentence. O Rajendra, please get up, please wash your face. So Uttishthotishta Rajendra Mukham Prakshalayasva. Why should a taha come there? The taha comes because of the Kukkutaha word. This poet could not fix the word Kukkutaha, so he put the taha in the beginning and Kukku at the later phrase. So together these two lines actually is gibberish. It is meaningless. But somebody now who has a very superficial understanding of Sanskrit would feel, oh, this is a nice poem. This is a pseudo-knowledge. And this was created to also communicate that this is a pseudo-knowledge. Okay, so we have ample number of examples like that. So if you look at Subhashita Ratna Bhandagara, a compilation of several Subhashitas, there is a Kupandita Varnana. How a Kupandita can be recognized. So again and again I am repeating Santatah Parikshyan Yatarat Bhajante. So this is a dictum, has to be blindly followed. So whatever we excavate and get it from the past, we have to carefully analyze it, thoroughly do the research behind it, then come to some conclusion. Otherwise, we will be just shooting in the dark and kind of wasting our time, and in fact, making a fool of ourselves also. Now, having said that, the opposite extreme, that anything that is written in Sanskrit or from India is all rubbish, is an equally deplorable stand. Because even after all, Western science calls for falsification, calls for you have an open mind, you test it, and then you kind of, science is just a method. Scientific approach that we take is just a method. So we cannot at the same time celebrate whatever we get from the past in the Sanskrit as some super knowledge, superlative knowledge, and at the same time we cannot dismiss saying that it is just a pseudo knowledge. One has to get their hands into the business, test it out, and then show it in the contemporary language whether it has to be considered as knowledge or pseudo knowledge. There are many, and currently especially there are many such things coming up where everything and anything from the past having some sprinkled Sanskrit here and there is considered as a superlative knowledge. So this is again kind of a ignorance trap or a knowledge trap which we must definitely not get into. So as students of science, it is imperative on us to in fact test it out and then convince ourselves and then propagate that particular knowledge, whether it is proper knowledge or pseudo knowledge. Our tradition has never shied away from calling a spade a spade. If you look at one more astronomical text from the 7th century, it is from a Kashmiri scholar called Lalla. His book is called Shishya Dhi Vriddhi Tantra. In that, a whole chapter is dedicated how one should not blindly follow the tradition, how one should question everything. Okay, so I'll not get into the examples of that, but then I gave a long answer, but the summary of it is we need to test it out and cannot blindly say whether it is pseudoscience or whether it is superlative knowledge.
Do Marxists really have scientific temperament towards our past?
Well, this is a very loaded question because there are multiple terminologies which we'll have to understand very carefully. One is Marxist. the other one is temperament, scientific temperament, and the other one is about our past. Now, Marxism has got multiple dimensions, and the limited understanding that I have about this Marxism is non-conformism, and they would like to topple the existing authority, and what would happen after toppling the existing authority is something that I have not understood about their philosophy. Now, science never works with authority, be it the Western science or, for that matter, the Indian science. Science is universal. And the authority is, in fact, speaking of authority, is considered as a logical fallacy. So much so that one of the old documentaries of Carl Sagan, one of the celebrated astronomers, he gives you several tips to identify a logically flawed argument. One of them is speaking from authority. Science can never accept an authority. So here, when we say a Marxist approaches a science in their inherent capacity to topple the authority, I do not know what kind of authority they are going to topple in the domain of science. Now, be that as it may. If you look at the history of evolution of knowledge in the Western world, why I am particularly categorically now talking about the Western world, is that the whole, whether we like it or not, the human thought process has been shaped by quote-unquote religion across all the civilization. I may have problem with the term religion, but because we do not have exact counterpart in our Indic language, but for the time being, let me continue with the term religion as we all commonly understand it. Now, in this broad religion, we have two: Abrahamic and non-Abrahamic religion. Now, Abrahamic are the followers of Abraham. They are the religion of the books, and predominantly they are three in number: the Judaism, followed by Christianity, followed by Islam. Now, how they look about each other, even though these are all religion, how each one looks at the other, we are all very much aware of, and how these three look at others, the non-Abrahamic, that also we are all aware of. Now, in all this thing, how a Marxist comes into picture. If you look at the evolution of knowledge in the European soil, given this background that the religion had shaped the thought processes, when you had exchange of information, influx of new information to their soil from various regions, their own indigenous people questioning, looking at the nature and trying to understand the nature in a non-conformist way, not the way ordained by their books, you had clashes happening, and then you had clear stand, one taken by the religious authorities and the other taken by those who were so-called heretics who opposed these religious authorities, and that's how their conflict or their dialogue gave rise to the evolution of knowledge base. So it is in this category that the so-called, starting from the Protestants, and then later you had this Marxism coming into picture, where they position themselves as though they will be questioning everything. Now, given that brief bird's eye view about that, when we come to our Indic side, Indian side, you had different ideologies in the society at different points in time, and some of them remained in the fringe, some of them became the mainstream. Now, at what point of time they got to the fringe? Were they at some point of time in the mainframe, or were they right from the inception in the fringe, is something matter of debate, but that we can never resolve. But what I'm trying to arrive at the point is, you must have heard of a term called Charuvaka. This is called a Charuvaka philosophy. Now, this is called a Nastika Darshana because of the technical definition of Astika and Nastika is different. I will not get into that. But one of the dictums of Charuvaka is also this questioning. Question everything. Do not accept, because based on their epistemological approach, they believe only in pratyaksha. Like whatever I see, then that I will believe. Otherwise, everything else I will question. So we were very much having this kind of thought process in our setup, and we had, when I say we, the mainstream process could surpass them and put them in the fringe. So much so that they perhaps are now remaining in the fringe. But nevertheless, their voices were also heard at one point of time. Now, when this Marxists look at our past, will they be in a position to go into such kind of minor details to say, okay, we also had people of questioning attitude. We had, and by the way, questioning attitude is not just reserved to Charuvaka. If you look at Manusmriti, of course, Manusmriti is defamed in a very, very wrong manner because of its selected shlokas, cherry picking of selecting and putting it out of the context. But if you look at not just Manusmriti but say various other texts, how a Shishya chooses the Guru. In fact, it is a Vaiva that a Shishya conducts first and gets convinced that this so and so person is capable, will be capable of leading me to better intellectual levels. And then once that conviction arises, that Shishya completely dedicates himself or herself to the Guru. So, without questioning, can a Shishya accept any Guru? So, if you look at Radha Kumud Mukherjee's work, or one more very prominent historian of Indian education, they have gone into details of how this Guru Shishya Paddhati had evolved. Shishya had to question, and he had a choice to leave this Guru. If he finds that this Guru is not capable, he can go to a different Guru. So my question is, will the Marxists go to such nuances and lay out all the details? Or will they propagate only their preconceived propaganda items, and which is what they have been doing? So they, in my opinion, they are coming with an agenda to undermine the past, to completely delink it. So they will be cherry picking only those aspects and putting them in that light, which will help the cause for them to peddle that kind of sentiment. So although they claim to approach it with scientific temper, in my understanding and in my reading of all this kind of their approach towards science, it has never been a scientific. To conclude my answer with a small example, you had, when the history of chemistry itself, P.C. Ray was considered to be a nationalist, and you had, this analysis was happening in the 80s. So P.C. Ray was considered as a nationalist. Whether he was a nationalist or not, that's again a different debate. But he was bucketed, he was classified as a nationalist, and then so-called Marxist historian were putting out points which were supporting their cause and opposing whatever P.C. Ray had to say. So one such point they will come up and say, when P.C. Ray wrote the book, by the way, P.C. Ray wrote the History of Hindu Chemistry Part 1 and 2, which got published in the first decade of the 20th century. By that time, Mortimer Wheeler had not announced or had not even carried out the Indus Valley Civilization excavation. Harappa excavation was not started. So they will say, fine, whatever P.C. Ray wrote, it's not having the ground because the Indus Valley Civilization was not discovered. It had to wait for even 15 more years for P.C. Ray to know at least about the Indus Valley Civilization. So if P.C. Ray has attributed certain thing to Vedic, now we have certain thing from the archaeological excavation which are pre-Vedic. So they are secular. So this kind of argument that they furnish, which is very superficial and which can be easily refuted, but that's again a matter of different kind of talk. But to just answer your question very, very brief, they claim to be approaching the past with a scientific temper, but I'm sorry, absolutely they do unscientific and cherry-picking aspects when they especially deal with Indian past.
Religion doesn't allow secular science. The common belief is that all our ancient texts are religious, so they cannot contain science. Your thoughts?
This question I will consider as a continuation of the previous question, where I had laid certain grounds about the terminology, particularly religion. Now just let's introspect, and what's the Indic word that comes to our mind for religion? It is translated as dharma. Okay? But this is one of the words which is a wrong translation, because dharma is not religion and religion is not dharma. Okay? So it is outrightly wrong to say all our ancient scientific scriptures are religious. It is wrong in multiple levels. The first level, the word religious itself is outside our corpus. Because as I told in my previous response, religion particularly refers to this Abrahamic corpus, and the whole terminology has evolved around this concept. So much so that they call, when the Christian world went to the different paths, they called others as pagan. Okay, pagan versus their religion. So religion in one connotation always means this book of religion, the religion of the books. Okay, so it cannot be transposed or even migrated to our corpus. That's the first level of mistake that we do. The second level, even if we now say all our scriptures have got God associated with it, so can it be scientific? Okay. Now, in my previous response also, I gave you a very brief schism that happened between the church and the heretics. Right? Lots of problems that was a genuine problem for the European theologians as well as the scientists. It's a no problem at all for us. But somehow the historians have carried forward that to our discourse also. The dialogues or the debates that the church had with the then scientists in Europe, where science was pitted against the religion, is just lock, stock and barrel transported to the Indic context also, which is in fact completely wrong. Now, whether we like it or not, whether we believe it or not, whether it is towards our liking or not, we had a system of writing, like how today if you have to publish, we have a system of writing that you have a title, you have an author, you have your affiliation, then you have abstract, keywords, introduction, so on and so forth. We have a template to publish it in a journal. There was a very scientific, systematic way of writing in our past also. It was called Tantra Yukti. For the first time we see this Tantra Yukti being enumerated in the Arthashastra as a last chapter. Tantra Yukti comes in the Ayurvedic texts also. And one of this aspect of the Tantra Yukti is Anubandha Chatushtaya. That is, in the beginning itself, you will have to have 4 elements before you start proceeding with the manuscript. What are this Anubandha Chatushtaya? One of the aspects here is the dedication, to whom you want to dedicate. It so happens that the Granthakara has dedicated it to their Ishtadevata. It is their personal relationship on which they have done. That does not in any way demerit the science that they are enumerating in their text. Remember, the science was pitted against a religion because of the religious background that the Europeans soil had. That was never a problem for us. But that being lock, stock, barrel brought here is a problem. Like a few years back, when this rocket was being tested, the ISRO chairman was seen to be going to a temple. That is his personal belief or personal transaction that he might have had with it. But all the news channels were kind of airing, saying that the ISRO chairman is having blind belief or superstitious beliefs. So, see, these are all narratives being built to peddle a particular propaganda. Now, coming to the point that can we have dharma separate and from vijñāna separate? Of course, if you look at our corpus of texts, Shastra, we have Dharma Shastra, we have Artha Shastra, and we have Kama Shastra. And Moksha Shastra, although it is not given the name Moksha Shastra, but in the entire Vedanta corpus is a Moksha Shastra. Right? our civilization has always been driven by this Chaturvida Purushartha, be it in any language, but origin was from there. And the invocation may be happening, but the later content were all to do with logic, were all to do with day-to-day affairs, whether it be in chemistry, mathematics, or whatever subject. So this question itself, I would say, doesn't. It's an ill-posed question when it comes to the Indian context, where we cannot pit science versus religion in our case. Okay, it is not a binary approach in our case. So that's all I have to say about this question, and I will leave it at that.
Can Vaisheshik Darshan be called scientific?
Vaisheshika is one of the Astika Darshanas, that is true. Now, can it be called scientific or not? It's a very deeper question. Now, what do we mean by science? As I covered in one of my previous response, science is just a method to unravel the reality. Or in other words, like this is one of my favorite lectures by Professor Balakrishnan from IIT Madras that he had given a few years back, Thaumaturgy in the Age of Science. Like today, if we have to have Galileo or Newton amidst us, will they be in a position to understand the technology of, say, even Wi-Fi? Will it appear scientific to them or not? Or is it thaumaturgy for them? Okay. So science and technology, of course, they are temporal. They are a product of a particular time. Now the question is, with today's understanding of scientific aspect, can Vaisheshika be called scientific or not? Science also evolves. Okay, if you look at the evolution of medicinal science in the European history, there are a lot of very, very funny things that they have done as back as even just 100 years back. Before the discovery of antibiotics by Alexander Fleming, the kind of things that they were resorting to are completely unscientific. Okay, so coming to the question proper, that Vaisheshika is scientific or not. But yeah, just one more digression before that. Somehow in some sect of our Indians, so-called intellectuals, there is a self-flagellation attitude, and there is a kind of a pleasure arriving out of the self-flagellation. What I mean by this is, self-flagellation, as the term may be self-explanatory, we would like to look down upon our past, whereby against whom we are scoring a brownie points, it is not very clear to me. So this attitude has become so pernicious that take anything and they would like to open it threadbare and say, no, this is not by Indians should not be credited for this. That has become like an established way of peddling one kind of a propaganda. Now, should Kaṇāda, the Kaṇāda again is not a very specific name, actually it is Kanuvada, the one who propounded the theory of a small building block. Okay, that's how the name Kaṇāda comes into picture. Now, whether he was mathematical in it, whether he was quantitative in it, no, definitely no. But was there an idea of a basic building block being construed? Yes. Is that scientific? Yes. Then credit should be given? Of course, yes. Dalton should, at the same time, we need not belittle Dalton. Dalton had propounded, at his point of time, he had given the theory based on the understanding of science at that point of time. So my point is, when you want to elevate Dalton, why should you necessarily decry Kaṇāda, especially when he has some meaningful things to offer? It is like again a typical Marxist philosophy that if I want to become taller, I'll cut the other's head. So this approach has somehow got stuck even in the scientific, so-called scientific research society, which in my humble opinion is not scientific at all. One more example, which again comes to my memory because of the chemistry background, and this is, believe you me, it is not just my own word. This is the analysis by one Professor A.K. Bishwas of IIT Kanpur. You have Sashyaka, Vimala and Makshika. These are 3 copper ores. 2 are pyrites and 1 is a sulfate. Now, they knew, the ancestors knew. When I say ancestors, you get to see the processing of copper written form in the Arthashastra. If you look at Panchanan Niyogi's work, you see of copper discussed in Yajurveda onwards. Of course, Niyogi also attributes copper in the Rig Veda, but I'll not get into those details. But what I'm trying to say is, our obsession with the copper has been right from the Rigvedic age. Now, copper, as all students of science know, no metals come in its zero oxidation state except for gold in a very rare quantity. All metals come as positive oxidation state in their different oxides or sulfates or pyrite form. So is copper, and in this case 3 different things are taken: Makshika, Vimala and Shashyaka. Our ancestors knew that when they process it, what the end product is tamra, that is copper. Okay, these 3 may look very different to start with. Their processing method may also be different, but they possess the knowledge that it was ultimately leading to copper. Now, A.K. Biswas asked this question: does this not demonstrate the knowledge of element much before the theory propounded by Dalton? What will be the Marxist answer to this question? And this is by A.K. Biswas, who is from IIT Kanpur, and by no leap of imagination, he can be bucketed into a right-wing scientist or a nationalist scientist.
Is IKS people trying hard to prove anyhow that there is science in Vedas?
So it's very good to see in my own lifetime there is a community of people being branded as IKS people. Whether it is good or bad, time will say that. But again, this question has got multiple layers to it. Is there science in Vedas? To me, it's an oxymoron. Okay? What's oxymoron? Viparita abhas. Science, all said and done, it's always dynamic. It keeps changing. It keeps evolving. Veda, by its definition, is nitya. Okay? Now we are trying to pit something that is eternal against something that is dynamic. Are we kind of fixing a square peg in a round hole? Okay? That's something which we have to be very clear about. Now, science in Vedas. What is science? Is it that if I am able to convert that science into a product through a technology, then it is a genuine science? Now, if you read Satyaprakash, Professor Satyaprakash, who was the professor in Allahabad University, and to my knowledge, after Prafulla Chandra Ray, if anybody has done an exhaustive work on the Indian chemistry, it is Dr. Satyaprakash. His work is then in Hindi, though. He says that if humankind has to take pride of any discovery, it is the invention of fire. Okay, and he credits the Rigvedic Ashwins to the invention of fires. So much so that the Greek word Prometheus, who is credited to have stolen fire from the heaven and brought it to the earth as per the Greek mythology, he goes to the extent of etymologically showing how Prometheus is coming from the word pramantha. Manthana, even today in some very traditional yajna, if there is happening, you do Agni Chayana or Agni Manthana. You do the manthan, and then due to friction the fire comes, and that fire is used for the yajna. So pramanthana is a word which in fact has gone to the Greek as Prometheus, is what Dr. Satyaprakash says. So if ever we'll have to credit for the invention of fire, it is the Rigvedi Ashwins. So is there now not a product of fire or called science in the Vedas? Yes, we very much have. But the oxymoron that I was talking about, we have a theoretical framework and the technology may change, but the theoretical framework need not, that remains robust. So for us, the Vedic corpus or the knowledge enshrined in it, something serves like that theoretical framework. Okay. No, but this theoretical framework is not the be-all and end-all, because in our tradition, the Chaturvida Chaturdasha Vidyasthana or Ashtadasha Vidyasthana, you kind of bifurcate knowledge that is Paramartha and Vyavaharika. So that which is ephemeral and that which is Loka Vyavahara. You use Vedic knowledge for a specific purpose. And this has not been just in the recent past. When Panini was trying to create his sutra, by his time itself the Vedic Sanskrit had become kind of old. Okay, so he treats Vedic Sanskrit in a different way and the Vyavaharic Sanskrit in a different way. So today when we say, is there science in Vedas, or IKS people are trying to prove science in Vedas, we'll have to first clarify the question that we are asking. Are we asking the right question or not? There are nuggets of knowledge pregnant in our Vedic corpus. Nevertheless, it needs effort. My previous response also, I said it's like a narikela paka. With our effort of unraveling the language and our understanding of this current contemporary science, it is for us to interpret them. This may run into criticism also. People like our detractors or criticizers will say, fine, now you are retrofitting everything. And thereby you are saying, fine, now you know the science, you have found this word. So you will say, now this was there described by this word. So this retrofitting is also, we should genuinely not get into this retrofitting aspect. That's also not correct. But yes, indeed, the Vedic corpus is our knowledge base. Okay, and whether that knowledge base we are able to unravel it in the current scientific term is our challenge. So I'll leave that question with that response.
Instead of taking pride in what our ancestors did, should we not focus on what we are doing now? Does modern research use ancient knowledge?
I cannot answer this question with full conviction and belief, because this is a work in progress in my own worldview of understanding things. Having said that, the question that really bothers me is when I look at, or when we look at our past knowledge, is it an exercise in history? Are we doing it? Or is it a scientific exercise we are doing it? Because if we are trying to understand the science in the ancient past, it's typically a historian's job. Okay? But there are certain dimensions to it which makes even the scientists get interested into looking at the past, because the historians have not put it in that particular perspective. I'll give you a very small example, and I think I've shared this example in other fora also, that as a student of chemistry I was never told that the word sulfur comes from the Sanskrit word shulvari. We take pride that Greek and Latin terms are in science today because those soils were the places where the science had originated, and that's why science tries to retain the continuity of its genesis by having the words from that language. But here we have a term which is in currency going from Sanskrit, but neither the historians have informed us nor the linguists informed us. So as a scientist, when we get to know of this, it kind of gives us a wow factor. But the question remains, okay, is it that for that minute, ephemeral wow factor, are we spending so much time and effort into it? It goes, I mean, we cannot quantify the ramifications of this wow factor, but it definitely helps for us to get a feeling that our ancestors were not just linguists, intellectuals and linguists composing poems in various chandas and doing only mathematics and astronomy. We get to know their intellectual diversity. We get to know what kind of science they did, with what kind of tools they had. Just for example, extraction or producing zinc of highest quality. Our ancestors were the only ones in the whole world to have done it for the first time in a very, very large scale. And this certification, whether we like it or not, today also we crave for certification from an international body. The international body has also declared it, that in the Jhavar mines near Udaipur, the tens of thousands of tons of pounds of zinc was exported. And when we know this fact, and even today smelting zinc is not a trivial task because of given its physical properties. Be that as it may, look at the medical literature. The kind of rhinoplasty, which had its own term. It has gone from India, it went to the Arabic world, the Persian world, introduced into the Europe, and how it again got revived. So when we get to know of all these things, like today, my field that I'm working, Raman effect, when C.V. Raman had done the experiment, he had used sunlight as a source for most of his experiment. Only when he was convinced, then he had started using the mercury arc lamp. But with that, he could get a Nobel Prize, but of course, he didn't have a laser. Today, laser is ubiquitous. We use laser right from pointer to even doing surgery of the eye or any experiment, even welding. Today, Raman spectroscopy, it cannot be imagined to be done without a laser. But when we realize, okay, in 1920, when Raman was doing it without the laser, scientifically also it gives a very, very important aspect that with such limited shoestring budget and limited resources, they were able to achieve such spark of intellect. We can extrapolate it to farther time. Like one example I gave was zinc smelting. There are examples like processing different metals and minerals and coming out with, so name it whatever science they were involving in it. As a student of science, if it does not enthuse us, then I would say we are not indeed a student of science. Then indeed we are a student of history, because that is just looking at the past, documenting it and propagating it. That is not what science is. So indeed it has got relevance in terms of getting into this intellectual past. It is not just about our scientific product in the past. It is how the thought processes evolved. Because many times we are told we were very dogmatic. Had we been dogmatic, such kind of intellectual progress would not have happened. So we are living in a particular time where it is all the more important to look at our ancient intellectual past to demystify and to kind of refute the arguments the so-called some class of vested interest historians have propagated in our society and in our impressionable minds. At least to break that, taking that as an agenda, it is all the more important to look at our intellectual past.
How you see Samvaad-like student initiative?
Very brilliant. I envy you. I envy the audience also, because had it been during the time when we were growing up, if we had this kind of access or interest, definitely I would be a different me. So it's very much laudable, very much appreciative, and at the same time I repeat, it's very envious also. Now, having said that, I kind of express my heartfelt gratitude, not just for giving me this opportunity, but also appreciating that people have taken time away from your regular dealings. You have your regular affairs. Apart from that, you have taken interest, you have shown interest to spend time on this and propagate this news. So that really requires a lot of passion and dedication, and my hats off to this venture, and I wish you all the best to come up with such materials and even better materials in the future. Thank you very much.